if I look at pro leadership, if I really honestly think about it, it came out of a yellow legal pad that I kept in the top drawer of my desk for 25 years. And every time I learned a lesson, I took out that legal pad and I wrote it down. And in order to be on the legal pad, I had to be able to write the lesson in one sentence of 12 words or less. And the funny thing is, when I finished Cornerstone, there were 37 lessons on that legal pad, 37 lines, and it was distilled down to 24 chapters in this book. But I didn't learn these because I was a great guy or I made good decisions. Most of those lessons were learned because I didn't do things right.
This is Better Wealth with Caleb Guilliams. Andy, welcome finally to the Better Wealth Show.
Oh, finally. Thank you, Caleb. It's a pleasure to be with you. I always enjoy my time with you.
So this is a very special episode for me because you're sitting in your office, and about 3 years ago, I make the drive up to Minneapolis.
Yes.
Spend 2 hours with you. And those 2 hours instilled in me a confidence and certainty and courage and bravery that has taken me to where I am now. And you've been my coach. You've been a coaching facilitator. You've been a one-on-one coach. You've been a great friend. You've been at our headquarters / house in Denver.
Love it.
You've seen me literally go from just starting what was BetterWealth Solutions in the basement of a Papa John's office to now having clients in all 50 states.
Yeah.
And where we met was in Minneapolis. I was going to a Christian event for students, and I was a senior at the time. I was knowing that I was going to go through the process of starting Better Wealth. I was still working at the bank, and I very much had the weight of like, what should I do for the future on my heart? And we went to the senior dinner, or it was actually a senior breakfast. And I kind of was looking for people to sit next to, and quite frankly, I just kind of gave up because I got in a little bit late. And so this is classic college. I go to the front of the room and sit down next to you. Have no clue who you are. Our table wasn't even filled, which is kind of ironic looking back. And we talk a little bit. I find out that you were in the finance. You were really humble at the time, but you're into finance. I'm like, oh, this is really neat. And then when they started the breakfast, they asked you to come up, the guy that helped found the breakfast, and share your quick testimony. And I was like, I don't want to over spiritualize this, but I'm like, I sat to the right next to the person that could literally help me be where I am today. And so I know I want some of that story to come through because it's so powerful. And I just want to plant this is you founded Cornerstone as a private wealth management business in 1993. And when you left Cornerstone in 2017, the firm grew from over $15 billion of assets under management. $15 billion of assets under management. And when you founded it, it's not like you guys had a ton of money.
$12.50.
And so you're the kind of guy that has done it, had offices in New York, has had clients, institutional clients all around, at least the country, I'm not sure world. And I'm telling you, man, we have a leadership crisis on our hands. And you have now pivoted, going fully into leadership, coaching. You have a phenomenal book that I want every single one of my audience to go out and get. And you're just getting started as it relates to the impact that you're going to have in the world. So with that, Andy, thank you for being a great friend. Thank you for allowing me to take 2 hours of your time when I was first getting started. Thank you for coaching. Thank you for just being a phenomenal human being and really being a backer of Better Wealth and seeing us grow.
You're welcome. And it's been really fun for me, Caleb, to be on this journey with you, to sit in the bleachers and watch you. And the exciting thing is I think your wheels have just come off the ground. I think you're going to just gain altitude from here. So just keep doing what you're doing, man. And you'll do well. You're touching a lot of people, and that's great, you know. And as far as me giving you 2 hours of my time, if I added up the amount of people that gave me 2 hours of their time, we wouldn't have time to talk about it. So just paying it forward. And I can just echo that it's great to have you in my life, because you keep me forever young.
Yeah.
Challenge me, and I have a passion for next generation leaders, and that's what I want to be about. So I'm glad to be here today. Thanks for the invitation.
So what I want to say is your book is called Pro Leadership. And when this is coming out, this is going to be, you can go out to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your favorite bookstore, and go get a copy. So
Yeah.
if you don't listen to this whole podcast, go and do that, because the book is chock full of amazing principles. And it's really neat as going through this and reviewing. It's like, oh, this is like, you actually told me this story, and oh, like this is
Yeah.
something I've learned from you. I also want to say this. Minneapolis is about 5 hours to where I grew up as a student and grew up. And you were shocked that I even made the drive. And I drove 5 hours to see you for 2 hours, and it was a no-brainer because I did research on you. I heard your story, and I was like, if I want to get to where I want to go in business, I need to surround myself with people that have done it and that share the same values and all of that. And so the cool thing about a podcast is we are going to capture all, I'm not going to say all, but we're going to capture some key nuggets of wisdom. And the crazy
Yeah.
thing about 2021 is we live in a world where you can literally learn beside people that have done it. And the difference between being smart and being wise is being smart is learning for yourself. Being wise is learning from other people's successes and failures. And I know that you've had your fair share of failures along with successes, and that's what makes wisdom. And so with that, Andy, my hope is, can we could go into a little bit of your backstory. How did
Sure.
you build Cornerstone? Why leadership is so important? And that could be a whole hour. And so we're going to try to make it 5 minutes or less. And then what I want to do is, I've highlighted some key parts of your book, and it's impossible to go through your whole book on this episode. But my hope is that this can be so valuable that people go, I need to get your book, and I need to start following your journey, because you're just getting started as it relates to sharing what it means to be a pro leader, and all of the good things in your book, and all that you have to offer.
Yeah. Thanks, Caleb. So I was born an entrepreneur. I started with a Kool-Aid stand. We used to, I lived on the chain of lakes in Minneapolis, as you know. And in the summertime, they used to close off one of the lakes for 4 hours every Sunday so people could ride their bikes around it. And I very quickly realized that that was a thriving market for a Kool-Aid stand. And I wasn't the only kid that did it, but the difference was, instead of one flavor of Kool-Aid, I had three, and then I would have donuts as well. So 8 years old, I'm making $20 a week from my Sunday Kool-Aid stand after expenses, which was a fortune back then. Taught me that I wanted to. I had entrepreneurial DNA. So when I got out of college and I had graduated with a degree in agricultural economics with a concentration in commodities trading and history, I was going to go to the Chicago Board of Trade, or I planned to go to the Chicago Board of Trade to trade futures. But my dad said, you know, you haven't learned anything in college that will help you down there, and it's a cold and cruel environment. So why don't you go sell something on straight commission for a year and learn what makes the world go around? So he actually helped me get a job selling IBM computers. So I started out as an IBM salesperson in the first year that they took all their computer sales out of corporate and put them in 5 value-added resellers. I worked for one of those and was an institutional sales guy. In my first 3 months on the job, I took 1,000 business cards, went into 1,000 businesses and handed them out. I got rejected by 90% of those. 900 of those people told me never to come back, but the 100, they made me the top salesman in the branch for the next 6 months. And that led me to get a call from a friend of mine who said that he was familiar with a asset management firm where the CEO was looking for a young guy to teach the business to. That led to an interview. Um, and you might ask, why didn't you go to the Chicago Board of Trade? I didn't, because I had 6 fraternity brothers who all went to the Chicago Board of Trade. And in the year that I sold computers, 5 of those 6 got chewed up and spit out. And the one that was successful was opposite my personality. So I realized um, that I should skip that. So onward to the asset management world, where I ended up getting hired by one of the biggest asset management firms in the country, and literally carried the briefcase of the CEO for the next 7 years. I learned what I wanted to be and what I didn't want to be, and the time came where I thought I wanted to have my own thing. So went out with another individual and we founded Cornerstone Capital Management. Started as a private wealth management firm, grew it, and ultimately it evolved into an institutional management firm. And when I walked away on December 31st of 2016, we were managing just under $17 billion at the time.
Wow.
Yeah. But it was not all me. In fact, the best story that I can tell you is I was at our New York office, and I was on the corner of I think it's about 51st and Fifth Avenue, right close to St. Patrick's Cathedral. And I ran into an investment banker there that I knew from high school and I hadn't seen. And he looked at me and he said, "Andy, what are you doing here?" He said, "Well, I said, "Well, I have an office here. And my company has an office in New York, and I'm here." He said, "Oh, really? What company is that?" And I told him the name of the company, and he got a smile on his face. He said, "Well, I just met there today with," and he stated the man's name, and he said, "He's the head of their international um, group." And he looked at me and he said, "But you probably wouldn't have any connection to him. I'm sure he's much more senior than you are." And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I see him every day." I said, he goes, "Well, why would you see him?" I said, "Well, he reports to me." And the guy gets a smile on his face and he says, with a quizzical look, he says, "What do you do there?" I said, "Well, I'm the CEO." And he, even more quizzical look, he goes, "How could you get a job like that?" I said, "Well, I honestly don't know, but I think it's because I was there first."
Right, right. I think that's the position I'm in, and I think that's
Yeah.
gonna grow more and more apparent is like,
Yeah.
oh, the reason I have the position I have is I was the first person. That's
Yeah,
it.
I would not qualify for this job today, but I'm here, so
My application wouldn't even make the desk, but,
yeah,
the perks of being the having the first $12.
yeah.
So, amazing. And again, when I heard your story, and there's a lot more there. There's a lot of reasons why you left, why you started, all these things that I think is so impactful, and yet it's really cool to have you go back to your roots. And when I was sitting with you for the first time, you very much stressed the importance of leadership. So,
Mhm.
so Andy, why leadership? Because in a world right now, it seems like there's so many leadership gurus. There's people,
Yeah.
just cranking out books, and there's people that are making courses and coaching programs. And it's like, why did you feel the need to write another leadership book? And why did you feel the need to spend the rest of your life focusing on something that in a way people kind of roll their eyes at, because it's like, if I have to go to another leadership conference, someone's going to end up dead.
Yeah, I get that because you know what? I know how you feel because I felt the same way. But at the end of the day, I mean, my overall governing value is that without leadership, nothing happens. you know, wise, caring, balanced servant leaders are good leaders, and good leaders produce good results. And the truth of it is I got to where I was not because I was a great guy, but because a lot of good people helped me along the way. And so, yes, there are a lot of people writing on leadership. There's a book a day that comes out on leadership. There's a podcast a day on leadership. There's a lot, and I just have a unique experience. And I think everybody, leadership is a tailor-made suit.
Yeah.
And so, my passion is coaching leaders. And I don't believe you can put any leader into a cookie cutter. I think everybody's different.
Yep.
And you have got to tailor make that suit to fit the leader. And I think I've got a personality that can do that because people did that with me.
That's right.
Nobody forced me. They say that the best golf instructor is the one who doesn't try to teach you their swing, but can take your swing and help you bring it to the point where you can get the most out of it. And so that's the philosophy of my leadership development.
And I asked you that question because I 100% agree. And
Mhm.
in a world where everyone's talking about money, it's like it makes me cringe because yes, there's noise going on,
Yeah.
but is it actually penetrating people's hearts?
Yeah.
And I think it's sad because in a world where leadership is talked about so much, where are our leaders?
Yeah.
And then in working with you, I know it's very important that it's like if you're not leading yourself, you're not leading your family, you're not leading your community and your churches, and like you don't know the true definition of leadership. And you may know the definition of leadership, but you're not living it. And I think that's like for you, you've not only helped me with business, but I think you've helped me understand that leadership's not just this like check mark that you're like, okay, I should get good leadership because that's how profits work. It's like, no, this is everything to do with your life.
Yeah.
And so when you say that leadership matters and nothing can happen without good leadership, like I want to echo that. And so this is a Better Wealth podcast, and I'm telling you, what you're going to learn through this book and what you're going to learn through this podcast is the foundation of intentional living, which is this is the metric of better wealth. Like we want to do everything to unlock what that means to live intentionally. And Andy, most people don't even know what that is.
No. I think it's like my friend Johnny Parker says, we have a front stage and we have a backstage. And we live our lives on our front stage, and then oftentimes we ignore the backstage. And because we do that, it's such a mess back there that eventually the front stage comes apart. And so you've sat in this is my coaching studio. You've sat behind me, and I've had numerous people sitting in the chair that you sat in, and we talk about that. And we always every conversation with a leader starts on the front stage, but it ultimately gets to the backstage. It's my terminology is you've got to excavate before you elevate. And I think where leadership development breaks down is people are unwilling
Right.
to look at themselves in the mirror. And rightly so, because the world will judge you, the world will shame you, and so you have to self-protect. And that's why I believe coaching is so important. You've got to have someone who you can sit with and who can reflect you without judgment, without shame, and where you can become the best person that you were created to be. And I think that the process of that can be really messy.
Yeah.
And so you have to have somebody who's willing to um, listen to you and reflect you. And all of the things that have been worked on in neuroscience now, and um, a wonderful book that you and I have talked about is Your Body Keeps the Score. And you start to understand those things. And so a right brain needs a right brain to reflect it, to help it process. And that's really all that coaching is. And the thing I love about it is that I'm not concerned about my own balance sheet anymore. I'm helping somebody else develop their life. And I know we don't even need to talk about the balance sheet because it will take care of itself if they take care of that self leadership.
Well, and I think one of the most inspiring things that you did for me is you actually opened up your governing, like, you have documents that remind you what's important, who you are, which is so important because
Yeah.
people don't know who they are, Andy. And then it's like, what are you gonna focus on? Write down your goals. You know, you got me into the Enneagram and other things, and all there's not like a one size fits all. It's like knowing thyself, getting really clear on where you wanna go, and living a life of intentionality. And I don't wanna steal your thunder, but you review that on a weekly basis.
I do, and I have for over 20 years now, and it has hardly changed. It's like it's a form of a personal constitution. It is the track that I run on. It's who I am, and I try to. One of the things that I encourage all of my everyone, not just my clients, to do is to have that, to develop. You've got to know who you are, and you've got to know what your why is. And I'm so grateful for Simon Sinek in getting us all to talk about that again, because that is so important that
Yeah.
we do that.
Real quick, can you go through what that is? Because I think my listenership, the Better Wealth community, can learn a ton from that. And so, what is that governing documents that you review on a weekly basis, and what does that consist of from a big picture?
It is uh, well, it actually started 20 some years ago when I went to a um, a Franklin Covey.
Mm,
I read Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, and then I went to a seminar. It was a 2-day seminar, and they took us through life planning. I can't even remember. It was so impactful, but it resulted in a document that I have now that has been refined, that I literally, it's called my Refocus document. And it starts out with who I am, and I have a number of things written on there. I review what my primary identity is, what my secondary identity. Then um, I have a general aim for my life. Um, that's that I'm going to live for an audience of one. I have my aspirations written down. I have my why, my mission, my priorities. Then then I have my main area of emphasis or focus. And then I go into governing values, and I have six governing values that are, excuse me, seven governing values. Um, they are faithfulness, generosity, leadership, excellence, simplicity, health, and freedom. And then I look at my roles, and I really have four roles in my life. I'm a husband, a father, head coach, managing partner of Andrew Wyatt Leadership, and my fourth one is that I'm an ambassador for Jesus Christ. And then I have a sort of a lifetime agreement, lifetime contract I've written out for myself, um, that just serves no other purpose but to help me remember what I'm committed to, what my agreement is. And then I've written out. Then I have a 5-year vision and a 1-year plan, and I review that every week. And the governing values and roles and aims and those kind of things really haven't changed for 20 years.
yeah.
And so why that is so helpful, and then coming to my why, which was the piece that was added like 5 years ago. The reason it helps me is because one of my mentors said years ago, he said, Andy, if you're going to be successful, you're going to need to say no 90% of the time. And unless you have something that helps you say no, you're going to be spread too thin, you're going to be ineffective. And so these are the tools that help me say no, because I know who I am, I know what my why is, and not everything that comes at me in life fits that. In fact, most things don't.
There's so much there. Every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something
Yeah,
else.
that's right.
Vice versa. Saying no means you're saying yes to something. And if I can just take my listeners back to, me being 20, turning 21, and you sharing with me what you just went through, it was one of those things that I was like, oh my goodness, I am sitting with somebody who's literally built something that I'm wanting to build,
Hmm.
and is sharing with me all the do's and do nots, and not just saying, here's some principles, let me copy it on a whiteboard. It's like, this is the most intimate thing other than your faith, your relationship with your wife and your family. It's like, it was very, very impactful. And that's why I asked you to open that up, because I know a lot of gurus that would never open up their personal stuff. And so thank you for that. Your book is made up of 3 sections. It's
Hmm.
establishing credibility, it's building your following, and leading with impact.
Yeah.
And before we get into those 3 things,
Hmm.
I want to know why the 24th chapter is what I think is probably the thing that I've learned most from you. And I'm glad you talk about priorities and saying no, because you set this thing up. You talk about win today. Number one, why in the world is that the 24th chapter? And can you walk through that before we get into the overview? Because I think obviously all the chapters are great, but when you helped me understand win today, that for me, Andy, has been one of the things that has helped me understand how to say no more, which I'm still very bad at, but I've gotten better. But it's helped me understand that there's a lot of things that are urgent. There's a lot of things that I want to say yes to. There's a lot of things I want to do. But it has been the exercise that I've used to be able to refocus. I don't want to steal your thunder. So with that, talk through that principle, and then justify why it's at the end of the book.
Well, so the biggest thing the tyranny of the urgent. So the urgent every day overcomes the important 80% of the time, and especially for leaders. The reason Win Today is the last chapter is because, first of all, it's in the section of leading with impact. It's the last chapter because most people will remember the last thing they read.
That's right.
And they will apply the last thing that they read. And I would say if you apply nothing else, if you'd apply nothing else in the book, in the first section, establishing your credibility, know who you are and know your why. In the second section, um, building your following, understand the role of providence. You can read my personal story in chapter 14. And then communication, communication, communication. 85% of our leadership problems would go away, I believe, if we could communicate well. And then in leading with impact, win the day. Just manage yourself and win the day. I think, leadership books are only as good as the amount of application that you
That's right.
take away from them.
Can
So
you break down what the win stands for, and if it was the last thing that people read, what they would take away from that?
what's important now? What's important now? So get yourself into the mindset where you are constantly asking yourself what's important.
Yep.
And then if you can ask yourself that, you can ask yourself, is this important now? Is what I'm working on important now?
Yep.
We've got to ruthlessly eliminate distraction from our life.
That's that 100%. The book, The One Thing, has made its whole best-selling book based off of the concept of what is the one thing that, if such by doing, makes everything easier, irrelevant. Because it's so powerful. What I love about what you're doing is that being at the end of the book,
Uh-huh.
it's impossible to answer that question, what's important now, if you don't know yourself
Yeah, that's right.
and you're not like so I love that it's at the end of the book, but the reason why I'm leading with this interview as we dive in is I want that to have context, because you would open up every coaching call. You'd open up, when you help me really decide what we should be focused on. After you had the context of certain things, you would ask me that simple question, what's important now? And I
Yeah.
would be like, what's important now? And it would help me. It was that exercise that would be, okay, I want to do 10 things, but I won't do any of them well if I try to do 10 things. So
Yeah.
where Caleb's at, where we're at as a company, what's the most important thing that I need to be focused on? Like, what's important now? If you're if you're a husband, or a wife, or if you're running a business, or if you're a student, or if you're, regardless of who you are, this
Yeah.
question about what's important now relates to how you invest your money, how you spend your time, the people that you spend time with. It's like,
Mhm.
it's incredibly valuable if you understand the context of how you write about it, and how you communicate it. And so, again, anything else that you want to talk about that before we dive into the three parts of your book?
I'll only tell you that I think about it every day. I have a I have a list on Evernote. It used to be Win Today is what it was called. I retitled it the middle of last year. I went Win the Week. I decided that one day was too short of a period. So I look at Win the Week. I once a month I sit down and go, what do I have to do to win the month? And then that's it. Then
Love
I
it.
apply.
So let's talk about establishing credibility. And the two things that I highlighted is the entrepreneur DNA. I think this is a really valuable lesson that we go through. And then what's your why? And so what I want you to do is I'm teeing up establishing your credibility. It's part one of the book. Talk about your favorite parts of that book, and how it can benefit us as leaders.
Well, you're asking me to talk about my favorite children, and I don't have I don't have any, but establishing credibility, that's the excavation portion of leadership development. And as you and I have talked about, when you begin this process, it's a step process. Establishing credibility, building your following, leading with impact. And then once you get there, it becomes a cycle, a continuing cycle. So establishing your credibility starts out with just identifying what kind of DNA you have. If you have, I call it entrepreneurial DNA, but people get nervous around the term entrepreneurial because they go, I'm not a person that can start a company in their garage. Well, that's not what I'm thinking about. Entrepreneur is such a wonderful word. It's from a French word that really um, applies to anyone who builds an enterprise of any type. And we're all doing that. We're all we're all, if you look at the word, if you get geeky about it and look at the word enterprise, we're all doing that. So we all have some sort of entrepreneurial DNA. I believe that's the creative juice that we have in us, and we all have it because we're all made in the image of God. And so he's a creator. We are therefore creators as well. And that chapter um, determines whether you have natural DNA or whether you have developing DNA. Everybody starts at a different place, but I think everybody can grow it, and it benefits everybody. And then you go from there to a foundation of leadership, which the foundation of leadership is your strength times your passion equals your level of fulfillment. It is impossible to be an effective leader unless you are fulfilled. And you will not be fulfilled unless you're operating in your strength with your passions. And so that's the next step. And then from there, once you've determined those things, the next step you take is uh, you need to look yourself in the mirror. You need to know better than anyone else does who you are, what makes you tick. And then once you do that, I think it's a small step to determine what your overall governing value is. Everybody's got one. They just maybe haven't written it down or thought about it. And then once you've got a governing value, I think it's an equally small step to your why, which is to something so that something. And my why is to inspire and equip leaders who desire to develop the leader within so that they can become everything they were created to be. And that's establishing credibility. I think if you do those, if you take those 4 steps and you take them seriously, you have a foundation for leadership that 80% of the people don't have.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the amazing things that we got to do is in the foundation of leadership, talking about strengths multiplied by passion equals fulfillment. That was really cool because there are people that are maybe passionate about something, but are not doing what their unique abilities are, as Dan Sullivan is, noted for saying. And then
Yeah.
there's people that are really great. They love what they're doing. And I would say there's a lot of people that I know in this category. They're good at what they do, but they're not passionate. They're not in an area that they're passionate in. So what is the definition of fulfillment, and why is that so important for someone to live a fulfilling life?
Well, like I said, I've got it's an equation in my mind. It's your strengths times your passion equals your fulfillment. So your strengths are, what am I good at? What do I do naturally? What comes naturally to me? Okay. And I love the example. I love golf examples because I love golf, and Tiger Woods is second to none as an iron player in golf. Maybe the best long iron, middle to long iron player that's ever played the game. That's his strength. He's also a phenomenal short game player and great putter. Not so strong with the driver. Okay. So he focuses all his time on his strengths. He doesn't worry about his weaknesses. Okay, so we need to think about, what do we do well? What do we do naturally? What comes to us? And then you combine that with passion, and how you determine what you're passionate about is, I always say, what would you do for free? What do you do when you don't have to do it? And what are you doing? And this can go to strengths as well, but in the two sides, when you feel like you're in the zone, answer this question: when I'm in the zone, I am doing what? And that will help you get to both your strengths and your passion.
It's one of the questions that we ask is, if money wasn't an issue at all, what would you be doing? And that
Yeah.
really highlights, that's another question to highlight your passion. And I love the Tiger Woods example, because what typical education would say is, "Oh, Tiger, go to driving school."
No.
And
It's 80-20. You spend 80% of your time, or you spend 80% of your time, um, doing the stuff that you do best.
yeah. And
And
the crazy thing about the 80-20 rule is 20% will produce 80 or more
that's right.
results.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
Exactly. I
a
love it.
great the Strength Finders test is an incredible tool that
Love
I
it.
recommend people check out. And it just highlights what are you good at? Everybody on our team has taken it. And then instead of saying, "Oh, let's work on what you're not good at," they don't even show you what you're not good at. They
Yeah.
just
No, don't
focus on what you're good at. And I think there's so much there. And so you got to excavate before you elevate. Get
even-
really clear on what's important. You can understand a lot of Andy's principles are in BetterWealth, because we won't move forward if we don't have clarity on what's really important, if we don't identify your ROR statement, which is return on result, which is, again, another way to say what you're saying. So let's talk about building your following. This one for me is definitely the most meaty. There's most chapters associated to this. Talk to me about building your following and how you would, obviously we don't have 5 hours to go through what it would really take to go through all of this, but how would you explain that the second section of your book?
Well, I would say, so there are 3 questions that everybody asks a leader.
Mm-hmm.
This is, if you ever listen to John Maxwell, he, at some point, if you listen to him for an hour, he will mention this. There are 3 questions everyone asks a leader. Do you care about me? Can you help me? And can I trust you? And I wish I would have thought about that when I was writing this section of building your following, because every one of the chapters here relates to that and will answer those questions. Do you care about me? Can you help me? And can I trust you? Because first of all, you're building relationships. It's all about relationships. And that's about just letting people know you love them and you care about them. And you're for them more than you're for you. And that's not just, if you're just playing that lip service, if you're just paying lip service to that, it will come out. It's that mask will fall off soon. But if you're not, if you really care about people, it will go so far. Then it's understanding that leadership is about culture. It's about letting your EQ lead, your emotional intelligence.
Thank you.
Let it lead. I was on a call with a very wise man yesterday, and he said, let your heart lead and your brain will catch up. But if you let your brain lead, your heart might never follow along. It was just a great comment. Be a motivator. Teach what you know. You can't teach what you don't know. Yeah. We've seen, you know what? That's the part. You listen to so many podcasts and you read so many books, and you're like, these people have never experienced this.
Yep. It's got to be annoying for you. It is for me hearing people talk about money. They go, clearly this person's never had wealth. Like, I can tell people that are not rich giving money advice. And it's got to be frustrating. And I'll put myself under the bus here. It's got to be frustrating to listen to the 20-year-olds give financial leadership or leadership advice, because it's like, okay, you can highlight quotes and you can memorize maybe better than I can, but it's got to be tough.
You know what? It doesn't bother me anymore, because I remember I was there too once. Yeah. And I'm not as smart as I used to be, Caleb. So it's okay. Everybody comes along, but that's part of another chapter, leading with integrity and being real.
Yep.
Being who you are, leading yourself first, praising in public, correcting in private. And then my favorite one, I think if I had a favorite chapter, it might be being willing to take the back seat.
Yeah. I know that you talk about stories in these chapters. When it comes to being real, leading with integrity, is there any story that's tied to that principle that you'd like to share?
Well, I think all of them. I mean, if I look at pro leadership, if I really honestly think about it, it came out of a yellow legal pad that I kept in the top drawer of my desk for 25 years. And every time I learned a lesson, I took out that legal pad and I wrote it down. And in order to be on the legal pad, I had to be able to write the lesson in one sentence of 12 words or less. And the funny thing is, when I finished Cornerstone, there were 37 lessons on that legal pad, 37 lines, and it was distilled down to 24 chapters in this book. But I didn't learn these because I was a great guy or I made good decisions. Most of those lessons were learned because I didn't do things right,
Yep.
mistakes I made. So um, that's being real, just admitting that, hey, my publisher didn't think the book would sell if we titled it, 24 mistakes that bad leader makes.
It's what's hilarious is it would be interesting to run a split test
Uh-huh.
because I actually think there's the market for that. One of the things that I want to share because you are real with me is I don't remember what mistake that I made at the time, but I was just kind of like venting about a mistake that cost me over $25,000. And $25,000 is a lot of money, especially when you're trying to start a business. And it was it was I'm glad that I went through it and I learned a lot through it. And you said, "All right, I like to call this my tuition fund." And without giving up too much information, it's on you if you want to share. Your tuition fund's a little bit larger than mine. I'll just put it that way. And when you shared that with me, I'm like, okay, I'm going to shift my way of thinking. It's like I have spent more on my quote unquote tuition fund, i.e., Caleb's mistakes, than college ever cost me, and
Yeah,
yet
yeah,
it's a very positive, uplifting way to think about life and about mistakes and to bounce back. And so that's a personal story that I have of our relationship of being
yeah.
real, leading with integrity, and that's something that I've definitely taken from you.
Hmm. I
When
said,
you talk about willing to take the back seat, do you have any personal story that illustrates that? Because you say you're not going to choose a favorite chapter, but if you had to, this one would be up there.
well, I think it's just so important as a leader, knowing when you're going to take a back seat and you're going to let your other leaders lead and let them make the decisions. And I'll tell, this isn't a personal story, but this is where one of the places where I learned it. I have a friend who is a he's retired now, but he was a pilot for Delta Airlines, and he was a very senior captain. And as you know, each leg of a flight, they take turns pilot in command. And he was a senior captain, and he had a young co-pilot who was on literally his first trip, and it was his first leg to be pilot in command. And they're coming in with a full big airplane. They were coming in, and horrible storm in Minneapolis, and this young pilot is going to land the plane, and it was very difficult. And my friend said this was the most stressful landing that I've ever been a part of in my 33-year career. And I said, did you ever want to take the yoke from him? And he said, I wanted to take the yoke from him the entire time. And I said, why didn't you? He said, because that would have ruined him as a pilot. And so I had to trust his training. I had to trust the procedures and pray our way down and help him and coach him. And he goes, we landed just fine. But he said, I could have really harmed him had I taken the yoke from him. And he said it was my privilege to do it and my right to do it as a captain. But he said I would have maybe ruined his career. And that lesson has stuck with me.
Yeah.
And do you have your leaders that you have, are you letting them make decisions?
Yeah.
I'm coaching I'm coaching someone right now who is a recovering micromanager.
Yeah.
And it's the I think it's the genesis of a lot of the struggles that they're having.
Yeah. Yeah. To two things that I was gonna say micromanagement, and the other thing is I think this is a good chapter for parents,
Oh
is
yeah,
you,
absolutely.
giving up the 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 control to seeing your kids grow up can be incredibly difficult.
Yeah,
I'm grateful for the parenting that I had because it was amazing, and it also was like, um, it was one of the best things that happened is my parents weren't involved in business,
yeah.
and that for me was a really healthy balance. And so thank you for sharing that. That was a powerful story, and I think for those of us who lead companies or are responsible for things, we can relate, because I
Mhm.
wouldn't necessarily call myself a micromanager, but there's areas in business that I'm incredibly micromanaging. And how in the world am if I ask people to lead but I'm not letting them take responsibility, I'm not being a leader, and as a result, it's not just affecting me, but it's affecting their future growth and the profitability of the company and how we impact and serve other people. And so thank you for sharing that.
Well, and let me encourage you on your comment. I think your struggle is very common to the founding entrepreneur, and that's something you're probably going to have to wrestle with that for your entire career. So don't beat yourself up about it. Just be aware of it. Awareness takes care of 85% of the problem.
Right. Let's talk about leading with impact.
Yeah.
And this is the final part of the book, and I actually misspoke. There's more chapters in this section. It, like, grows. It's like section 1 is like, you don't wanna scare anybody away, even though you're attacking their heart and the foundation of why they exist. And then building your following is incredible, but then leading with impact, I know you well, and I know that this section is something that you live every single day. You definitely communicate it very well. So why don't we walk through that? And is there some personal stories that you've lived through or that have come up in writing this section that you want to also share as you go give me the overview of leading with
Well,
them?
it starts with, and I misspoke. It starts with leave room for providence. I had this in the this chapter 14, and then that's really my personal story and how I got to how I became who I am, and just the understanding of every leader needs to understand what they control and what they don't. And we control a whole lot less than we think we do.
That's right.
And if we can check that box and get that, we will, we'll just save ourselves from aging in dog years.
Yep.
I aged in dog years because I didn't understand that. So, and then the downside of consensus. When you come into leadership, and one of the hot buttons today and the things everybody wants is for leaders to have consensus and have everybody going along. And it's just not possible to get everybody moving in the same direction before you make a decision. So it's just getting an idea, getting a good working relationship with consensus in your team. And then communication to the third power, like I've already said. Um, you got to communicate, communicate, communicate. And that communication needs to go all the way down in the organization. And your strategies and your tactics will fail 95% of the time, in my opinion, at the point where your communication breaks down. So if something doesn't work, I'm guessing that you can go back and go, I didn't communicate this well. And that's that was learned from hard lessons. And then decision making at the speed of business. We have got to move. Our society, our culture is moving so fast today. I remember when we used to make 20-year plans,
Hmm.
then we made 10-year plans.
Yeah.
Now people laughed at 20-year plans. Then people laughed at 10-year plans. Now they're laughing at 5-year plans.
Yeah.
And then leaving yourself options. Just don't paint yourself into a corner. Understanding who you are, and don't forget about margin. You know, don't. I had a mentor who worked at a big agribusiness company, was a senior guy there, and he said to me, he said, "You never want to plant your fields all the way to the end."
Yeah.
And he said, we always knew that when the farmers were planting all their fields all the way to the ends, and when they're planting in between the highways, um, that was a top in the market. So you think about that, and then diversification, and these are tactics.
Yeah.
These are a lot of tactics and just miscellaneous things. I love the 45-minute meeting. And then of course we end with what's important now.
Is the 45-minute meeting, is no meeting has to be longer than 45 minutes?
Yeah, 85% of what you are going to accomplish, you'll accomplish in 45 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was thinking in terms of 45-minute meetings, 90 minutes max, so you have a break in between,
Yeah.
and then go on and do something else.
And what you taught me with margin is, and people can probably relate to this, I can sure relate to this, is you wake up in the morning and you are going to conquer the world, and sometimes we're just not realistic with our calendar. And so I've just learned to build in buffer time. For
Yeah.
instance, we're interviewing right now, and I have quite a few, but I have buffer.
Yeah.
And so I'm not worried about ending right on time, and I'm able to be more present with you.
Yeah.
And that's another example that I've learned. It's interesting because now that I'm engaged and in the process of looking to get married, everybody that gives me marriage advice says the C word, communication, and I'm like, don't tell me communication unless you break down or define what that actually means. So what do you mean by communication, Andy? And how can someone be a better communicator? And this is really your book too, because everybody says communication, and yet, just like everybody's writing leadership books, I don't know if a lot of people know actually how to actually communicate well.
I think goes back to caring about people and relationships. Communicating well is listening and caring and saying, it's answering the questions. So okay, so I said to you, in building your following, you're answering the three questions everyone asks. Okay. In leading with impact, you are demonstrating by your actions that you care about people.
Yeah.
And that they really matter to you. And so communication is listening. I mean, I think the best communication tool that I learned was management by walking around. We had 2 offices, and I would walk around every morning, whatever office I was at, with my Starbucks coffee. I'd walk around and greet everyone in the office. And if you do that over time, you start to remember, oh, you said you were going to your daughter's piano recital. How was that? How'd she do? What did she play? And you start to communicate, and that it opens the channels of communication. You ask questions, you listen, you care about people.
Yeah. And it's interesting because this book is it's not a faith driven book, meaning like it's for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And yet it's a lot of Christian values are in here, and it goes back to one of the things that you care deeply about, and that is an area like communication. There's not a tactic. It's like you can have the right tactic, but if you don't love people,
Yeah.
if you're not genuinely interested in them,
Yeah.
yeah, you can read all the books that you want, but
Yeah.
there will get to a point where you're just going to be talking,
Yeah.
or you're not really going to have the impact and the fulfillment that you're hoping to have. Andy, is there anything else that you want to cover in just this time? I mean, obviously the goal of having you on is, number one, is to honor you as a person. I want to see my audience support you in getting the book, leaving a review, and sharing with others. is there anything else that you want to share just with where you're at? And then if you can end with like how people can, reach out or get this book again and how they can follow you in your journey, that would be incredible.
Well, I just want to leave you with my governing value because I feel so strongly about it that wise, caring, balanced servant leaders are good leaders, and good leaders produce good results. And if people would just focus on that, they'll be miles ahead. And we do need leadership today. We need wise, caring leaders, and it's available for everybody. Everyone can grow their leadership, and that's what I'm about. So
leadership is not a position, and
no.
when actually understand that everyone can be a leader, and it's not a scarcity model where it's like, if you're a leader, that means there's one less position for me. It's like leadership helps other people grow.
Leadership
So,
is a multiplier.
I love it.
Yeah.
So Andy, I end all the podcast with this. You may have stolen your own thunder, but I want to hear it a different way. If this was your last day on earth and you were with the people that you love the most, your family,
yeah,
and you couldn't give them anything, including, you couldn't even give them your book.
Yeah.
You could only have one last conversation with them. What would that conversation consist of?
Well, I mean, if it for me, it would have to be faith. And where are you going? Where do you think, if this is my last day on earth, where am I going to be tomorrow? And if it was your last day, where are you going to be tomorrow? And how do you know? And we would have that conversation.
Andy,
at the end of the day, there are two things that are eternal, people, in the Word of God. We're all going to live forever. It's just a question of where we are. So that'd be the discussion. It wouldn't be about business. Wouldn't care about that. So thank you, Caleb.
Yeah. Andy, thank you. How can people get the book? How can people follow what you're doing and stay connected with your tribe?
You can get the book, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, wherever books are sold, Target, just Google it. You can come to Andrew Wyatt Leadership and my website. You can sign up for my weekly Pro Leadership Perspective. Begin following me on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever.
I love it, man. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for who you are. And I'm excited. I'm excited to see people start applying what you've written about. And it's only a matter of time that you'll be on the biggest stages sharing your failures and helping people understand that. And so thank you for living that out. Thank you for being a guest.
Thanks, Caleb.
Thank you so much for listening to the BetterWealth podcast. It would mean the world to me if you could hit subscribe, leave a review, and share this with the people that you know and love.